Hit record. All right, welcome back from spring break. I hope you had a good time off. It always comes in the middle of the whole semester, but for us, when we get started on the second half, we kind of catch it right at the beginning.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yes. So we will take it, right? So
I was I was just busy with therapy and trying
yes.
to get this knee in place.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
All right, so last week was week 2, so of course we didn't meet last week. And so you have the opportunity to jump right on in there. So I want you to make sure, and everybody that's watching the video, make sure you go back to week 2 because we're kind of still in it. Do week 2, excuse me, discussion board. And the discussion board from last week is what are the first, second, and third gospels in the New Testament? And what is the synoptic problem? We'll talk about that tonight
Yes.
as we talk about the book of Mark. And I also want you to go to week 3. So you have week 2 and week 3 discussion boards to work on. And both of those discussion boards will be due on Sunday night. Okay, so some of you already did them last week. That was fine, but we couldn't tax you, last week since it
Right.
was spring break. All right. Okay, let me do this. Actually, let me stop and let me open up this and I'm gonna come right back to you.
Okay.
I'm going to share the screen. Now, what we're gonna do is go back to week 2 and talk about chapter 5 in your book. And that is called, well, chapter 5 in the book, it talks about Mark. Let me open this up. All right, I'm gonna come back to you and I'm gonna share it on the screen.
Okay.
All right. Also, for those folks who are watching this recording, make sure also that you go back to week 1. If you haven't done it already, go back to week 1 and make sure that you watch Dr. Margaret Amer's video of Introduction to the New Testament. It's a wonderful overview of the New Testament, and I'm just partial to her because she was my New Testament professor at seminary. She is so wonderful and just like a walking book of information, just knows everything. So we are now in your book, in your textbook, chapter 5, and we're going to talk about the gospel according to Mark. And one of the key things that I want you to remember, and we'll talk about this today. So there are 4 gospels. You have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in each of the books, or should I say in each of the gospels, right? Well, the writers talk about Jesus. Actually, let me go back to the writers describe Jesus from different points of view.
Yes.
So sometimes you may see the same stories, but they'll be told with different information. Each book is written for a different audience and can be written during a different time frame. So we have this question, who is this Jesus? That's what the Gospel of Mark is trying to convey. Like, who is he? And in the 4 Gospels, all 4 of them really answer that question, who is Jesus, different ways. So we're going to talk about this word synoptic, and I'm pointing at my eye, synoptic. So you have eye, with one eye. And it means I believe that's I forgot what language that is, but seeing everything all together. So when you have synoptic gospels, that means that they're talking about the same thing or they saw the same stories. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are synoptic. John is not, because John comes totally different. John still talks about Jesus, but John doesn't use the same stories as Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Right.
So you'll find the same stories in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So those are synoptic. Okay.
Mhm.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about this thing called the synoptic problem. And the synoptic problem means, although, remember, we have those three books, we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They are very similar. They have similar stories. Some of them pull from each other. There are some, when we say disagreements, there are things that are like, wait a minute, that wasn't over here, but it's over here. Uh-huh. For you. What was the first gospel written? Oh,
Mark.
yes. So Mark was the first written gospel,
Right.
but what's the first gospel located in the New Testament?
Matthew.
Matthew, there you go.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I wonder why Mark was not the first one to be listed, since it was the first one that was written.
Yes, very good. Sometimes there's not always an exact answer for
Yeah.
it. It could be more so placement. It could
Mhm.
be the individuals who were pulling the canon together may have placed, remember, these are human beings. They may
Mhm.
have placed more emphasis on Matthew and say, hey, I think this should be up front. One thing that we will talk about, actually, let me pull it up here. I won't pull it up on the screen, but the book of Matthew, and I may have an answer here for you. Let me go to the book of Matthew real quick on my phone.
Mhm.
And those people who are watching the video, you can pull it up. Yeah. Okay. So I was right. If you just open up the book of Matthew, and if you go to the first chapter,
Mhm.
opens up with a genealogy of Jesus. So it records all of the ancestors, all of the generations, and then boom, here comes Jesus. So I'm speculating because of course we don't have 100% answer on the why, but that could be a very good explanation on why they said, hey, we want to place Matthew first because
Mhm.
Matthew opens up with this genealogy, like
Gotcha.
first this person, then this person, and then
Gotcha.
blah, 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 then Jesus came.
Right.
Mark opens up, Mark does not open up with a genealogy.
Right.
That's a very good question.
Hmm. I
So the
just
thing,
often wondered about that.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. So that could be one of the answers there is because of the genealogy that opens up. That's like a perfect introduction.
Right. Oh, okay. Because it names everybody in the line of the family line and
Right.
everything else. Yes.
It sure does. And then in Mark, if you open up Mark, Mark starts with John the Baptist preparing the way for Jesus.
Mhm.
So actually, Mark doesn't have a birth narrative. So Jesus is already grown in Mark.
Mm.
In Matthew, when we get to that, in Matthew, he's a baby. So we
Mhm.
get the birth narrative in Matthew.
Right. Okay.
Mhm. That's good point.
All
Good
right. All right.
observation. So even though Mark was the first gospel written, Matthew and Luke borrowed from Mark.
Mhm.
Okay. Matthew and Luke borrowed from Mark. So I want you to remember that. That's what we call the synoptic problem. Even though Mark wasn't the first book placed in the New Testament, which we just said, right?
Mhm.
But Matthew and Luke, because they come later, they use Mark as like a reference and they
Mhm.
pull stories from Mark as well.
Mhm.
Mhm. And then if you see right here, Matthew and Luke have some passages that are not in Mark. And that means that they used other sources.
Oh,
And
yeah.
those other sources are called Q. which are just like unknown sources. Those sources are called Q or Kel. And those are just unknown sources. It could be, now remember, full-fledged books and things like that, it just wasn't, they just didn't have it. So sources could be from word of mouth. It could be something that somebody written that one of the authors was able to get their hands on. Stories that they overheard from someone that they included, but we don't exactly know what the Kel source is. So we call that the unknown. So they pulled it from other places. Mhm. Awesome. So as we look at this diagram, the synoptic problem. Let me put this up here. All right. So if you want to, you can put your finger on the screen and follow the arrows because it can get a little confusing. And for my folks who are watching the video, you can just put your finger on the screen as well. All right. So let's see if I can move my little laser here. Let's see if I have a little laser that can come up. Where's my little laser? Okay, here's my laser. All right, so we're going to go right here. We've got Matthew, the book of Matthew. We got the book of Luke. Okay. Then we have the book of Mark. Now, well, let's pay attention to the arrows. Mark was written first. Let's go to Mark. You see my little arrow up here?
Yes.
All right. Now, who pulled from Mark?
Matthew.
And
Luke.
mhm.
Oh, okay.
Matt and Luke. All right. Now let's go over to Matt.
Okay.
Where did Matt get his information from? See over here?
That is from Mark.
Yes.
And I can't see the one under your picture there. I mean,
Okay.
there's one over here in the corner. What is that?
Okay.
That's MQ, and I don't know what that is.
Okay. So Matthew got his information from Q.
Q.
Okay, as well as Mark, because you see the arrow going to Mark, and M.
And M.
So M is material that was only found in Matthew. So there's some stories that's only in Matthew that weren't in Mark and weren't in Luke. And they didn't get them from the Kel source, okay?
L, M, Q, Mark, okay.
And tell me if I'm going too fast.
No.
Okay. All right. Let's go to Luke.
Okay.
Where did Luke get his information?
From Q.
Yes.
And Mark.
Yes.
Then there's something in the corner over here, like I said, I can't see that one.
Okay, and then that's from L.
L, oh, okay. Yeah, I can see L, yeah.
Okay, so that means that Luke has material that's only in Luke. And that's the L. But what I want you to see is Kel, the Q source. So that means that Matt and Luke went out and got some information from Q, and that was found in both Matthew and Luke.
And Luke, yeah.
Not Mark.
I guess Mark thought he didn't need their information.
Say it again.
I said, I guess Mark thought that he didn't need their information.
Well, Mark was written first.
Yeah, all right, okay.
Yeah,
But
so
they
Mark
had to get
came
it from him, okay.
So Mark came first. And so what I want you to see, if you're able to look at Luke and Matt, Luke and Matthew have stories that are only found in Luke, and then there's stories that are only found in Matthew. Okay. All right. Let me see if I put this up here. And before we move on any further, there's something also called the four source hypothesis.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so you're seeing it right on the screen. So the four sources, so it says that our gospel writings, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but we're more so talking about Matthew, Mark, and Luke right here, okay? The synoptics. And so it's saying that these three books have four sources. They come from L,
Hmm.
Luke stuff. They come from M, Matthew stuff. They come from Q, which is Kel, or they come from Mark. Awesome. Now, one of the things that I really want to highlight, well, Old and New Testament, but we need to bring it up again, is even though we say it's the book of Matthew or it's the book of Mark, it's the book of so-and-so, sometimes we are not exactly sure who wrote it. We don't know the exact author, but what we say is it is attributed to Mark. So perhaps the individual of the book may have had a hand in pulling information together. Maybe they had a team of people. Maybe folks got information from Mark. Maybe Mark wrote most of it. Maybe he wrote 2 chapters. We don't really know.
That's true.
Mhm.
Hmm.
But what we do know is when we do our research and when we look at the authorship, we do know that this particular author spoke Greek. And the context is very important when we think about where were these people writing these books.
Mhm.
So the person lived outside of Palestine.
Mhm.
Mhm. Okay. So it's very interesting also when we read the books, we have to ask ourselves, like, who wrote the book and what were they trying to prove? What was their point of view? And if you're able to see it, Miss Jean, if you look right down here, let me see if I can get my cursor. Down at the bottom, let's see.
Where it says Mark sees.
Yes.
Okay. Mark sees Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God. This is the point that the author is trying to prove by writing this book. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Sees him as the Messiah. Yeah.
So location is important.
Palestine. Okay.
Language is
Mhm.
important. So we know that the New Testament was written in Greek.
Mhm.
And he's with these group of people that are not necessarily, okay, so the New Testament church isn't a church like what we see it today. It's just formulating. They didn't have the New Testament because they were living it out, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's moving
So,
into it. Mhm.
right. So many of themselves found themselves ostracized by the Roman government. They're living on the outskirts. They're scared. They don't know what this thing is. They want to have faith. And you find that the Gospels are being written and the epistles are being written to give these new Christians some hope.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So let's just pause for a second. Miss Jean, why do you think that Mark has to write this book to prove that Jesus is the Messiah? What do you think was going on?
Well, there was a lot of confusion,
Right.
at that time. And what you just said, that they weren't sure of, I guess, the lineage, and they were looking to these, uh, gospels to give them the insight of what was actually going on in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And like you
Excellent.
said, a lot of them were on the outside. And
Mhm.
so, they weren't really involved in what was going on, during this time of the writings.
Very good. Very good.
So they needed somebody, I guess, to kind of lead them, you know,
They did.
To guide them where they needed to go.
Right, and to pull together the
together.
theology. So the Gospels are also pulling together the theology of who Jesus is,
Mhm.
how do we think about Jesus,
Mhm.
why did he come, what
Where
was
he
the
come
purpose?
from. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure they probably said, well, what is he going to do for us?
True,
No?
true.
Yeah.
So the New Testament, remember, they're living out the New Testament. They don't have it necessarily to read yet. They only have the Old Testament to read
Mm.
at this particular point.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. All right. Here's actually, I moved too fast. I love this picture, but this is
Looking at it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is supposed to depict, it's, art, but supposed to depict Mark.
Hmm. Sitting there writing. What is that? Is that a lion? Is that a lion or the animal? What is that animal right there?
Yeah, looks like,
It has one. It has
and
wings.
it has wings. So,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna say, I'm not sure. Looks like a lion.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's fine. Mhm.
Yeah. It's a good question.
Hmm.
Like, what is this here? Good job.
Okay.
All right, so let's get a little example here of how Mark starts and how he makes a point about Jesus. So
Okay.
Mark is writing, Mark's the author of Mark, or Mark, we'll call him Mark, wants the Jewish people to know that Jesus is a Messiah. So the audience that he's writing for is probably going to be more so Jewish.
Jewish, yeah. Hmm.
The key thing that he wanted to write is, oh, and actually, let's look at this second bullet here. Miss Jean, you can read that second bullet.
Okay. The Jewish people would not recognize the name Christ.
Right. And actually, go ahead to the third one. That's fine.
So they would only recognize the Messiah.
That word would have been better. They didn't really recognize the word
Right.
Jesus Christ. So to use Messiah, I'll go to the third point. So the Jews understood the title of Messiah
Yeah.
much better than Christ, because like they,
Hmm.
for us, we're already here in 2024.
Yeah, yeah.
But they're trying to figure out, like, okay, what is this? So Mark uses the term Messiah more often.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Okay.
Because he wants the Jewish people to understand that, hey, y'all missed it, and you got an opportunity to get it back,
Yeah.
but they didn't believe that he was Messiah.
Hmm.
So let's go right here. And I put the scripture on the side. If we open up the book of Mark, all right, there we go. If we open up the book of Mark, and I put it right here on the right-hand side of the screen.
Okay.
Oh, I've got a different, let's see. I'm gonna change. It opens up the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Or I'm reading from, this is New International Version. It says, the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God.
Okay.
King James Version says, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So let's just pause right there. Mark 1:1 tells us what? I mean, how does he open it?
The beginning. I can't read. Let me pull it up right quick on my.
Okay.
So I had it on mute and airplane mode too. Just a minute. Mark 1:1. Okay. The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God.
Yes,
And mine is the NRSV too.
gotcha. So what does that tell us about this author? I mean, he just opens up like, this is the beginning, this is the
Yeah.
beginning of the gospel, this is what you're gonna get. What do you think he's trying to say?
Good news. I mean, it's good news. I mean, I guess he's trying to encourage the people
Yes,
in one sense and let them also know that he is Jesus Christ, the Son of God.
right,
And let's see, beginning.
right.
This is the beginning. So how else would you want to start other than have some good news to tell, the people that are listening to him?
True, true, true. So he opens up Mark 1, chapter 1, verse 1. He's like, I'm not making any bones about it. I'm telling you about Jesus Christ. And who is he? The Messiah, the
Yeah,
Son of God.
Mhm.
And he's gonna lay it all out in the book that he said, I told you in the beginning that he is Christ or Messiah. Okay. And then he proves throughout the book that, see, he is.
Mhm.
Mhm. So the opening, if you pay attention to how each book opens, is very, very important.
Yeah.
Don't miss it. So this opening line, he's like, I don't want you to miss it. My purpose is I'm going to prove he is Messiah. Mhm.
Wow. Okay.
So notice in Mark's gospel, Jesus is an adult. He's
Mhm.
not a
Not a
baby.
baby,
Right.
like in Matthew.
Like in Matthew and Luke. So for example, I'm gonna go to my Bible here.
Mhm.
Oh, there we go. All right. So I'm gonna go to my Bible in Mark 1. And it opens up with Mark. Actually, okay. It opens up with Mark introducing us to John the Baptist and the baptism of Jesus.
Hmm. Okay.
The baptism of Jesus is in verse 9. He didn't miss anything. So let's just pause for a second. Why do you think Mark didn't include the baby Jesus?
Baby like me. What's gonna be Jesus? Um, hmm,
Mhm.
that's a good question.
That's all right. It makes us think,
Mark
right?
did not include him as a baby. Um, I don't know.
That's okay. No worries. And it makes us, we're just thinking. There's no
Yeah.
particular hard answer. And then when we think about it, Mark, remember Mark's gospel was written first. His
And you
gospel,
would think, okay, you would think that if he wrote the gospel first,
uh-huh.
that he would begin with Jesus as the baby
Mhm.
and not as an adult. But maybe he did that because um, Luke and Matthew did the baby part, and he took it upon himself to do the adult part.
Okay, but
Mark.
remember, Mark is written first. Mark doesn't know anything about Matthew and Luke yet.
Luke. Okay, so he doesn't.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
this is just helping us think critically, like,
Mhm.
uh-huh. So this is just we're just thinking critically, right?
Mhm.
If Matthew and Luke borrowed things from, let me go back to the previous slide.
Okay.
If Matthew
Matthew
and Luke borrowed from Mark, and Matt and Luke got things
Luke
from
got
Kel,
from Kel, and
maybe Kel had the birth narrative information.
okay, see, it's like you said, Mark did not have the genealogy,
No,
but Matthew did.
but Matthew did. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay, so he, hmm. Or he chose not to write about it.
Or he meant, right? We don't really know.
No?
We're thinking critically. We
Hmm.
don't really know, but if the information was available to him,
Hmm.
maybe he would have wrote it
Maybe.
down, or
Or
maybe
maybe not. Yeah.
Mark was like, look, I'm starting from an adult because this is just
Uh-huh.
what I want you to see. We're thinking critically. We're just thinking
Okay,
out loud.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so what I want you to see is
Oh, you know what?
Luke and Matthew have the Christmas story, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
maybe
With the
Luke
wise
and
men and all
Matthew,
that, yeah.
there you go.
Mhm. And Mark, well, like, okay, if you're thinking critical, Mark, he was the first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Huh. That's a good.
So this, yeah, it just helps us to think like, these are the information sources, the books or the scripts that they had available. Maybe Mark had some information, maybe he wasn't sure about it, or he just said, this is where I want to start. This is where I want to start my story.
Oh, okay. I mean, they had a choice, right?
Well, he had
He
to have a choice
had a choice,
because
yeah.
Jesus was grown.
Yeah.
So we knew he had to be a baby at some point, right? And got
Right,
here.
before he got an
Yeah,
adult. Yeah, became an adult.
right. I'm sure Mark was privy to like, all right, he had to be a baby. Maybe he heard about these things. However, whatever information was available to Mark, I'm sure he knew that Jesus grew up into a man. But he decided, this is where I want us to get, is that he decided to open the book at adult Jesus with the baptism,
Hmm.
with the baptism of Jesus. Yeah. In your book on page 63, you'll find this as well, but I want you to remember that even the name Jesus was popular, and for individuals to be called Son of God there were other men that were called Son of God. And so there were other individuals that were doing miraculous things. So that's one of the reasons why they look at Jesus so skeptical, like a skeptic, because they're trying to figure out like, yeah, we think you're like one of these other people around here fooling us.
Why are you so different? Or why do you need us to think that you're so different? Like you said, there are other, people that were there that were
That's
doing
right.
the same thing.
That's it. So Mark is trying to distinguish, all right, y'all heard the other son of God, but Mark is trying to distinguish Jesus from them other people, that he is Messiah, Son of God. Them other people was just real nice, and
Just
they could
regular
do,
people.
yeah, they were regular people.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, but Jesus was, well, just like it said in this bottom paragraph here, like he had supreme authority,
Right.
and those other individuals didn't, even though
Didn't.
they did miraculous things.
Mm-hmm.
Because Jesus was the Messiah,
Mm-hmm.
he had the supreme authority. Mhm.
That's right. So
Okay.
he was healing people, forgiving people of sins. And when the folks in the area were seen as like they would, you hear the repetition, who is this that can forgive sins? And they're thinking like, why are you talking about you can forgive people's sins? Because these other people were going around trying to touch and heal people, wasn't working, but probably wasn't working like Jesus's healings were working.
Right.
Yeah. So they're like, who are you?
So they probably didn't see that readily, did they? That, well, I guess they did though. When those others were laying hands, that the people were not being healed. But when Jesus came along, you know,
There was a difference.
that up and yeah. Okay.
Mhm. There was a supreme difference.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent questions.
Okay.
So let's look at chapter 2. Let's look at Mark chapter 2. Go
Okay.
to my book here. Mark chapter 2, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how Jesus was so misunderstood and
Mhm.
opposed by the Jewish leaders. So the Jewish leaders they are just not liking Jesus. They question his actions, they question his motives, like, why are you healing? They even, why are you healing on a Sabbath?
Yeah.
Why do you say you could forgive people? So the Jewish people just didn't like him. They also were probably a little bit jealous of the power
That
that
he
he
had.
had, right? The ability to heal people, the affection that he had for people, the compassion that he had for people, and people were flocking to him. That makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah. Because all of a sudden this is happening, whereas before, there was not a person that was kind of standing out. And Jesus, like you said, came along. He stood out because that his healing was, instant, and
Hmm.
others, did not have that power.
Yeah, they didn't have the power that Jesus had.
Yeah.
So they're jealous.
Yeah.
They are jealous.
That's only normal.
Right, right.
Acting like normal people.
Right, to get jealous because they don't have what he has.
Yeah.
So as we see with the Jewish people, he is very misunderstood. He becomes ostracized. And later on we see what happens, but even the disciples are very skeptical of him. But let's go to Mark chapter 2, verse 7.
Okay. You want to read it from my Bible, or?
Yes, please. That's
Okay.
good.
All right. Why does this fellow speak in this way? It is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone?
All right. And so what's happening in this passage is, if you go to Mark, the top of Mark 2, okay, he's healing a man who was paralyzed.
Epileptic.
Right. And so the Jewish leaders will continuously challenge him in the Gospels, and they challenge his authority, they challenge his teachings, they challenge his healing. So what was that, verse 7 we said?
Mhm.
In verse 5 and 6, he tells them that he says, son, your sins are forgiven. And they're like, hold up, who are you to forgive people's sins? You're just a man.
Yeah.
They didn't know. And we have to be really honest and give them some leeway where they are true human beings, and they're probably super confused. And we have to think
Yeah.
like, wow, if that was me, I probably would be confused too.
Yep. Sure.
All right, let's head down to Mark chapter 8.
Okay.
Mark chapter 8. And then we're going to go to verse 27.
27.
And you let me know when you get there. So even the Jewish leaders are trying to figure out who he is. They're
Yeah.
very skeptical of him. Jesus starts to call the 12 disciples. And when you get there, you can read it.
All right, I have it. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of
Caesarea.
Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Why do people say that I am? No, who do people say that I am?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then in 28, they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." Hmm.
So in this passage, thank you so much. In 26 and 27, or 27, 28, bless their hearts, the disciples don't really know. They're still figure out. We know it's something special about him. We know that he has powers. We know that he is compassionate and he loves people. That's basically what they know at this.
Yeah,
But they're even really not clear about the divinity of Jesus.
right.
They don't know. So Jesus makes it a point to ask them, well, who you think I am? You know.
Mm.
And they're like, well, all the people said this and other people said that. And then he comes down a little bit later and said, well, what did you say?
What do you say? Well, I ask you.
Yes, you. And Peter said, you are the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another way that Mark is using those words, Messiah, to prove back to the Jewish people that this is the real deal.
Right. Oh, wow.
So as we're getting ready for Resurrection Sunday, and what, not next week, not this week coming up, week after.
Week after, yeah. The last
Mhm.
one.
Yes. So Mark's gospel is very important in showing a suffering Jesus, because remember, he's writing to a Jewish audience and he's like, look, you all missed it, and I'm going to show you how you messed up.
Mm. Mm.
Mark indicates, let's see here. Yeah, we got time. Let's go to Mark chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
Uh-huh. Mark chapter 2, we're going to go down to verse 20.
Mm. Mark chapter 2, verse 20.
Mm-hmm. And then once you get there, just read it.
Okay. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast on that day.
Right. And that lets us know. So Mark indicates that Jesus is going to go away. Jesus is going to suffer some type of death and be taken away from them. Let's hop over to Mark 3 and verse 6.
Oh, that Mark 2.
Mark 3, chapter
Okay.
3,
Okay.
and verse 6.
Hold up.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 6. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So Mark is making a point for the writers, for the readers to
Mhm.
see that Jesus's death was a plotted death. It was, they planned to get him.
Mm. And that it was imminent.
Yup. So he suffers an unfair treatment under the Jewish council, Jewish leaders called the Sanhedrin. And they're probably going to be playing it soon, that the movie, The Passion of the Christ,
Oh yeah.
hear that word passion, that means suffering. Sometimes people's like passion, passion can mean a lot of
A
different
lot of
things,
things, yeah.
not like a love or lust or something, but passion means suffering.
Wow.
So he's publicly humiliated in Mark's gospel. He's beaten and spat upon, just suffers this tremendous public crucifixion. But Mark is really trying to prove, as he paints the grim picture of the crucifixion, he's trying to prove to the Jewish audience that he's Messiah. So
Mhm.
now let's head down to Mark 15.
Okay.
Mark 15:39.
Yeah. Okay. Now, when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was God's son."
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
mm. Isn't it something how it took all of that for them to realize that in actuality he was the Son of God?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then some of them did. Some of them
Yes,
still did.
yeah, still standing there looking at him. Yeah.
True. But you're right. It
Hmm.
took all of that. It really did. It took all of that. And so Mark uses the centurion or the Roman soldier, which is very important
Hmm.
because the Roman government was the one that was after him.
Yeah.
Okay. Roman government wasn't really big on believing in something different because they were very into their like pagan worship and they loved the Greek gods and things like that.
Hmm.
So for this Roman soldier, the centurion to say, "Oh my Lord,
Hmm.
truly this man was God's
God's
son."
son. Wow.
What does that say to you?
That's profound. And for him to realize that at that moment,
Yeah.
um, like I said, it took all of that that went on prior to this for him to get to this point and to say
Uh-huh.
that, and to say that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Stood facing him and saw that in this way he breathed his last.
Mm-hmm.
Um, mm, mm, mm.
Well, you bring up a very good point that Mark brings this up because he is clearly painting the picture that he is Messiah. He's going to use those words that the Jewish audience can understand, right? So he uses that word Messiah because they understand that word clearly. He wants them to see that they missed it. Now, before we leave, there's something I want you to see too.
Mhm.
So how many chapters does Mark have?
Oh, 15,
Flip to the end.
16.
Yes, 16.
Mhm.
And then Matthew has 28.
Hmm.
Luke has 24.
Okay, okay.
Mhm. So what can that tell us? If Mark was written first,
And he had 20,
hmm,
you said Mark had 24?
no, Mark has 16 chapters.
16, that's right, he had 16. Matthew had, let's see, sixteen.
How many chapters did Matthew have?
I'm gonna ah, hold on.
We'll flip to the end.
28,
28.
yeah. And then Matthew, Mark, Luke. And 1, 2, 3. Into 4,
Okay, and Luke had 24.
24.
So that tells us,
So let's see, Mark. Oh, Mark didn't. Oh my gosh.
so that tells us if Mark had 16 chapters, right?
Yeah. Wait a
We-
minute now.
We keep going back to this. Mark was written first. He had 16 chapters. Matt and Luke had way more than him.
Way more. Matthew was 28 and Luke was
Yeah.
24.
So that tells us that, yeah, they pulled from Mark. So of course they could make a bigger book because they pulled from Q.
Right. They
Oh.
pulled from more sources.
Correct.
Yeah, than Mark did.
Uh-huh.
Mark only did Matthew and Luke. Mhm.
No,
No,
Mark was
no, I'm
first.
sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mark was first. That's right.
Mark was first.
So
And
Matthew,
they got information from Mark. Mark was first. Luke got information from Mark. Matt got information from Mark.
hmm,
Mm-hmm. So that helps us a lot, even though, because we got to remember, Matthew is written, was placed first in the New Testament.
right, in that order.
But we got to remind folks when we're doing our studies and stuff, say,
Teaching,
say,
because I'm
hey,
sure a lot of people think, they don't think that Mark was the first.
yeah,
Just because the way it is written in the New Testament now and how they follow each other. Oh no,
right,
they'll say Matthew was the first.
right,
Yeah, I'm sure.
right.
But you gotta know what you gotta know.
Not always chronological.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope that
Yeah.
sheds some light on you.
It does. I mean, especially since Easter is coming up, it's a
Yep.
lot of